Okay, so the entry point to my app is this init function in app.json, which is Expo's config file. You can see that I have here entry point build index.js. Build is where ClojureScript will put my compiled file, and then it will run this function when it starts up. So it does this default app.db, which is an async function. Not maybe there's a cleaner way to write this, but basically it just gets the persisted state items out of the local storage on the device and merges it in to a map, and then calls a reframe function to set that up as the initial DB. You'll see it also does this c/register notifications. Now this component namespace is where I have all of my JavaScript functions imported, and you can see here that this register for push notifications async is in my utils namespace. I just have to export it, and then I can import it like this. I can JS require the file as utils, and then it's just a property on that utils object. This is very handy because a lot of this notification code and some of the other view code is like 70 or 80% copy and pasted from documentation, and you don't want to have to be translating hundreds of this sort of boilerplate from JavaScript to ClojureScript. It's actually painful. But that's what this setup does. It also merges in these default routines, which I've just defined here as I was messing around with the data structures that I would use. And we can then see that we call this render root, which is a shallow CLJS function that does basically the same as reagent render DOM in the web world, if you're familiar with that. If we go into the views namespace, all we're doing is calling our JavaScript components that we've imported from that component's namespace and passing a bunch of props. And these props are usually either subscriptions to our state. Then we do some processing, which Clojure is great at, to the data. Here we're doing a group by to get those categories in our list. And then we simply pass this into the React native component with all these props. We have a bunch of reframe handlers which we pass in. Maybe I could abstract this in some way, but I find it's better to be clear if you're not sure. And when we have these functions passed in, you can see in our routine list namespace, we just get these props and we will pass them to other components, and these other components use them however they want. I think it's a nice pattern. It's probably not executed the best because I had a very short time frame and don't know what I'm doing. But anyway, moving on from the views, the interesting stuff is in handlers, and this is where all of our logic is. I started this pattern, which I don't know if it's a good idea, of having all of my reg event fx calls down here because I have interceptors that pretty much everything wants to use. These interceptors are for persisting the DB and doing some debugging stuff. And then every event fx or event db is just a normal Clojure function. Okay, so start routine is the main function really that starts everything off. When I click a routine and I click go, it will associate that activity into the state. It will schedule some notifications, we'll look at that later, and it will dispatch later start routine again, but with the index of the activity incremented. So this index is used to get the activity out of the list. So a routine is a list of activities, 1, 2, 3, and when we do start, we do it with index 0, so it starts activity 1, and as soon as activity 1 starts, it will do this dispatch later with a timeout of the duration of the first activity, and then after that duration is over, the second activity will start. So it will do start routine, index 1, and that will start that one. If we go to schedule notifications, we take our list of activities, we drop up until the index. So if we're on activity 3, we obviously don't want to schedule notifications for the previous activities because we've already done them. We filter out the ones that have the has notification toggle. I couldn't use a normal take while because that would leave out the last item, and because we do dispatch later, so starting activity 1 dispatches activity 2 and starting activity 2 dispatches activity 3, I needed to take while including like the end one. So I just made a new function there, and we take until there is an activity without a duration, because that activity will need to be manually confirmed, and so there's no point scheduling notifications for after it because we have no idea how long the user will take to confirm it. So this is the logic-y bit, and then I will actually schedule the notifications. So there's a bunch of messy code to come up with a message to send the user, and once I've come up with a message, again, this send notification is defined in JavaScript. I have to remember to convert the Clojure object of my activity to JavaScript so that it won't complain. When I use the reagent components, that happens automatically, but when I call it as a normal function, I have to remember to do it. And I give it the time of that activity. This is going to schedule it in X milliseconds. So if the activity is a duration of 10 milliseconds, then that will be 10. And I will dispatch this event, which will add the ID of the notification that has just been scheduled to the DB. The reason I do that is because I can have multiple routines playing at the same time. If I stop one of them, I want to cancel all of the notifications scheduled for that routine and not the other ones. So that's how I manage that.